Good evening and welcome to the Byrdcliffe Forum on Thursday, January 20th, 2022. This is the first of 10 events scheduled for the forum in 2022. I'm Doug Shear, lead of the forum. Tonight's panel features the Artists of the Forest Bathing exhibit, which was curated by Jen Dragon. The panel will be moderated by Sara Lynn Henry. Sara Lynn Henry is an independent curator, art writer, and emerita professor of art history, and the NEH Distinguished Teaching Professor of Humanities, emerita at Drew University. She was director and professor of Drew's Semester on Contemporary Art for 25 years, with studio visits to over 300 artists and meetings with art critics and other art professionals. Her curatorial work has focused primarily on art concerned with the forces of nature. Two of her curated exhibitions have been at the Kleiner James. The Animals Look Back at Us and Labyrinths of the Mind. Others have been in New York City and in New Jersey. For example, I Am the Cosmos and As If Alive animate sculpture. She also has interest in cross-cultural dialogues, especially those between Asian and Western contemporary art.
I would say, first of all, that my primary interest in joining with Jen on this show has been my interest in response to nature. You know, that's why I'm here in Woodstock, and I look out my big windows and I go for walks in the meadow in the woods and I read a lot. But interestingly, I can't fully do it myself. In other words, I'm not fully there in the way the artists are. The art has been an answer as an entrance point, and now as I learn more and we work with a frame of this practice, actually it is, of forest bathing, which gives many ways to do it. I think that this show will launch a lot. Let me give Jen Dragon, who I've known since she had her gallery in Socrates, and I have to say that Jen has played a huge role in the art community here in this area, that it was at her gallery that a lot of us got to know each other, a whole network, and stunningly good art, that she deals with things with her intelligence, but also with her enthusiasm, passion, and kindness. She has had 35 years doing many things, all involved with art, works as a painter and as a curator, a gallerist, an art writer, installing, as we all end up doing, which is fabulous fun, and art advisor, public relations, and now an online marketing specialist, which is really helping to focus things. She's also worked with local community things, such as the Walkway Over the Hudson and the Jewish Federation of Ulster County and Kingston Design, Cats Bend Cultural Park. So anyway, she is really part of this network of being that's here. And I think it shows with the show. So I would ask Jen, and we talk a little bit, but what prompted you to put this particular exhibition together? And where did you come to this forest bathing notion? And how did you choose the artists? So we'll go from there.
Okay, those are good questions. And I think that idea for the show came from the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you guys remember from a year ago when we were also shut down and there was nowhere to go. There was no businesses, the galleries were closed, museums were closed, restaurants were closed, and everybody was outside. It was cold, it was wintry, but everyone would be out on the rail trail, and they'd be walking in the Catskill Park, they'd be hiking. And it was such an interesting thing to go out into nature and see everybody, just wanting to reach out, but to be safe and to be distanced from each other, but to somehow find community in the woods. And I remembered a term from Japanese culture about forest bathing, and it felt like that. And I also felt there was a certain amount of renewal that happened socially in spite of all of this. We got to know our neighbors. I lived 10 years in Highwoods and I didn't know anybody around. And all of a sudden, these people are coming across, from the front of the porch, and you're like, hey, how you doing? And then we'd go out every weekend on the rail trail. We'd meet friends there. And it became a kind of a healing experience. So out of this, I thought about the artists I knew. And I also thought about, the importance of how do we make a gallery exhibition where we can kind of melt the walls of the gallery and make it the insides come outside and the outsides come inside. And that's where I thought the Kleiner James Gallery would be the perfect place for that, because you have a huge window in the back and you've got all these, you've got this, it's located in Woodstock, and it just felt like the perfect venue for a show like this. But I didn't really want it to be strictly a landscape show. I wanted that's an important feature, but I wanted to have contemporary takes on it, and each one being very kind of different than the other. And that was important to me, because I thought that's what was so interesting about the forest. You have artists like Iain Machell focusing on like the texture of things, or Lyon Paul with, I shouldn't go into it because I'll let the artists speak for themselves, but you've got Lyon Paul with his paintings on glass that can kind of make it almost religious, or Christy Rupp, who's looking at the animal life and what they give to humans. And I don't know, it seemed to me like there was all these different kind of takes on the thing, and that was how do you bring these all together, and how do you get them all talking to one another? And that was the challenge of the installation.
Yeah, I love to think that in putting a show or thinking of a show is that the works talk to each other. And that's when it works. And this happens in this show. Were the artists already impelled or familiar with this idea of forest bathing, or did it come to seem resonant to them as you were talking to them and putting it together?
I think all the artists on some level, because they're inspired by nature, knew this intuitively. So I'm not sure if the concept may have been like, oh, there's a name for it, forest bathing, but it was something that was sort of a natural inspiration. And I think actually, even if you are an abstract expressionist like Ashley Garrett, you're going to, that idea of the forest as being it's a big abstract canvas. You've got the light that comes through the leaves and the trees, and that kind of inspires what she does. You've got these Martin Weinstein, who's capturing the actual layers of time and space, and by constructing these plexiglass boxes. Everybody seemed to have this sort of innate idea of how the classic relationship to the forest can be reinterpreted for contemporary art.
Yeah, and I found it interesting that every single one of them really deals with not what nature looks like, but a nature experience. And that's what that concept of forest bathing connotes. I think I'll talk a little bit about that concept, unless Jen has anything else she wants to add about the exhibit, or you can plunge in if you want to. That term forest bathing and that idea in the US is fairly recent. The books I had were 2018 and 2020. And it sounds kind of woo-woo, like go take a walk in the woods and relax, and be part of nature. But it's much more than that. And this is what I find is coming out in the art, that experience and research shows that doing so is literally healing. that you literally have an experience of a lowering of stress, a change of mood, your biological processes change, you become more involved with life and life energies. And there's been research to show this, that it actually works in physiological terms. The concept was first defined in early 1980s in Japan, and out of their nature tradition and beliefs that, you know, every element of nature has its own indwelling spirit. You know, it's part of Shintoism that is at the base of Japan. But they came with the term Shinrin Yoku, which means forest bath. You know, you think, okay, I'm going to take a bath in the forest. But why, one of the authors really explains why bathing is such a piquant idea about the experience. He writes, this Clifford, that the air through which we walk is in many ways similar to water. It moves in currents, it flows in waves. You know, you can see the movement of clouds. You literally inhabit a living ecosystem that itself is also always in process, you know. But to, as they say, to be available to it is almost what artists do, is have an experience of receptivity. You know, things come to you. If you go out to grab it, you won't get it. You know, it's the real thing.
Well,
So-
if I could just interject one moment, we
yes.
were looking at Christy Rupp, and I would say she is the one artist, I think, in this group that's very different than the others, because she addresses more the disruption that happens in the forest. And she's got both sculptures and collages. The collages kind of just, there you go, the disruption of mankind into the forest environment. And also the sculptures, which, if you look closely, have a molecular formula in them. And it's basically about how the animals, that what they excrete is commodified by pharmaceutical companies. So she kind of addresses the dark side of mankind's interruption of the forest. So not everything is happy in forest bathing world. There's, you know, there's also things that are disturbing and worrisome. So I liked that element in this show, because I felt like it was important to also address how mankind does get in the way and makes trouble for the environment.
So yes, that having that full scope of that experience in the show. What I thought we could do, or that I would do to kick it off, is go one of the artists at a time. And I've put it from those that are more, you know, the nature experience is more available and more there. For instance, let's start with Marty Weinstein. And then we would go further into penetrating into nature and into some of the problematic qualities. So let's start with Martin Weinstein. And here is this is it, Road Through Oaks. I noticed the one thing, Jen, there are no dates on any of these, but shall I assume that all of them are fairly recent? That we don't have dates with the works.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just an art historian in me, you know, saying, "Oh, yeah, right." Well,
all of mine in the show are within the past year and a half, 2 years.
Oh, great! Yeah. So, could you talk? And do you go by Marty or Martin? Which do you prefer?
Martin, yeah, sure.
Martin's good. All right. So, Martin, can you talk about your plunging into nature? Because that's what I find in these, and it's even more vivid in the gallery where the actual work is there, because this flattens a little bit out. You know, what is it? What are your objectives? What are you looking for? And what are some of your experiences? So let's get to Martin's work there going forward out of the gallery. Yeah.
I mean, I would say that the overarching subject of my work is time. They're painted on layers of plexiglass over a period of time. So the one that's on the screen now is afternoon over evening. There's a picture of that same from a slightly different angle and a little closer underneath. And then another view of it in the afternoon on top. It's very hard to see all of this. It's, much clearer when you see them in person.
That's
But, so time and how it relates to the things I love, which is nature, the people I love, my work is all done this way. You can see in this one, it becomes pretty clear at the top. There's a view of Hook Mountain and the Hudson River, and you can see one is sort of going straight across, and then there's one that's slipping down. That's the view that's underneath around sunset, which is it's underneath. Yeah.
so. Go backwards to number 8. There you go. Just because I think that as a slide here shows the floating nature of the layers.
Yeah, the
production that we have.
Yeah, again, this one is called Evening Under an Afternoon, and you can see the trees that are redder, lit by evening light. That's a whole other view of this scene that's underneath, and then the afternoon view is on top. One of the reasons that they're all painted outside.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really set up with these plexiglass panels outside?
Yeah, it's a big job. It's heavy. But yes, and I mean, I think part of it, and I think, I spoke with Anne at the opening, and I think she has a similar experience that, the pressure of painting in front of the subject and the light is changing and makes you sort of short circuit a lot of like niggling things that you might do, and you end up like scratching at the paint with the handle of the brush and scratching your fingers through it, and you're just trying to get the image down. Yeah, so there's this thing that's happening where the layers are painted very freely, but then the construction is a sort of intellectual exercise that's completely different.
One of the things I think is so interesting about your work, Martin, is that normally in a painting, these layers happen on top of each other. So you don't see the changes. When a painter paints in either oil or acrylics or whatever medium, you've got the experience over time is kind of, it obscures. The top layer obscures the one below.
Yeah.
What you've done is very deliberately isolated these layers, and so it almost becomes like, if anyone's, as an oil painter, or what you're doing is compressing all this space, and then you have this finished product that says, okay, this is the summary of what the landscape or this image is about. However, what you've done is deliberately isolated them and made them clear and discrete from one another. And that to me is a really interesting position to take as a painter, that you don't want them to all mesh together. You don't want the finished product to be the last word. You want the memory of each one to be that you can access it again, instead of having it all blurred up, in some finished layer. And I think that's what's kind of as a result, I see where your subject matter is time, and then by making that time and making those separations, you've also create a deep space, because when you look at the image through the plexiglass, you see the depth of things. It's very different than seeing a flat illusion that a painting can be. In fact, what's even funnier is when you watch people looking at the art, the viewers, they start to rock because they're watching the planes shift from one another.
Yeah, when you walk in front of it, it shifts a little bit front to back. And the time, it's interesting because you give in the title either over and under, or under and over. And those seem to be like two times a day,
Yes.
so that you have that sense of a continuum. I think also, and I thought of this with Anne's work as well, rather vividly, and since you mentioned her, is that the sense of touch is touching it, but touching it from your inner experience of it. It's what in Chinese aesthetics they call spirit resonance, which means that you resonate with what's out there, and the fact that you're not pinning it down to exact details, but rather it's something that's in process, and that your response is in process, is really great. So I've round out so we can get to everyone. We'll come back. But just to say that that Martin started as an abstract painter and then moved to nature painting. I think maybe not unusual for the entrance time of doing one's work. He also co-founded with Teresa Litska, am I pronouncing her name right?
Lishka.
The alternate space called Art in General, which was down on Walker Street from 1981 to 2015. Then moved to Dumbo for a few years, and then with Mana Contemporary in Jersey City, and has had to round out because of the COVID thing. But that particular space was one of the true vibrant alternate spaces of artists' work and artists who are entering into the dialogue with everything. And I would say, when I said this to Martin, ran this semester on contemporary art, I took students there because we came in the city twice a week, several times. And I had a meeting with Emma Amos, whose work I'm really quite caring about, at Art in General. So I would say that's one of your great accomplishments. Did you continue? You weren't director that whole time. Did you continue involved with it over all those years?
Oh, yes.
I know,
Yes.
I mean, probably everyone dives in.
Yeah, chairman of the board, a lot of fundraising, a lot of, yes.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Great. Well, it's a major contribution. Okay, let's come to Anne. Leith, I'm pronouncing it right? Yes.
Leith.
Leith. Okay, it is the
Keith with an L.
Leith. Okay.
Everybody.
You're entering into nature. What kinds of experiences and discoveries do you find as you've done this work?
You need to find a place where you can pee outside and nobody can see you. You need to find a place where you can get some shade if it's hot. You need bug spray. You need sunblock.
I love it.
A bottle of water. Maybe something to weight down your easel so it doesn't blow over in high winds. So that's just the gear. Let's just start with the gear, right? I call some of my paintings another roadside attraction because I don't want to haul that stuff 100 miles into the woods by myself and then, have to get it back out again. How's that for a start?
What kind of place?
That's what I'm talking about, don't you?
What kind of places draw your involvement?
I typically I really like places, so I don't really put, like, I do work from the model, but it's a separate practice from the landscape.
Right. Yeah.
So typically I don't have people in them, so I try to find a place that's quiet. I can pull up and like be safe. That's beautiful, that has drama, but you can find drama in a park. You can find drama in a parking lot too. I like urban landscapes as well.
All right.
This is just really pretty deep nature, this stuff.
Let's put up number 13 and leave this one, the creek, for a moment. One of the things I found just in general is that you chose different kinds of places. In other words, you just didn't go and do waterfalls and then go back and do more waterfalls. Each one has its own character, and I love that word you used, it's drama. This is the creek. What was it that captured your attention here that you followed and touched with stroke and color and shaping? What were the things that you really connected with in looking at this place?
I have thank you for asking. I have a real affinity for running water, any kind of water.
Oh yeah.
I really enjoy that, and the rocks are just there. It's like it became this one. I did it outside. I had to like haul my stuff into like the middle of the creek, which was an adventure. But then I brought it home, and the thing about my practice as well is that I don't necessarily just do a plein air painting and just leave it like that. Like I'll take it home and I'll
really?
I'll recraft it, the whole thing, and it suddenly becomes very, very abstract, very sort of, you know, thing touches thing, meets another thing, you know, not to go all Jasper Johns on you or anything, but it really does. You have to find this after balance where you make the surfaces strong enough and you make the shapes interlock. I don't know. There's a whole nother thing that happens afterwards in the studio with a lot of them, not all of them. Sometimes you hit it the first time, but typically you end up sort of completely rethinking what you put down in the moment.
And with this one, as with the others, it seems like a series of phenomena that you respond to this and to that and to that. I mean, you look at the water coming over, and then you see it going through the right, and then you see it going through the rocks, and then it bubbles up, and then it swishes down. In other words, you literally enter into all of that. And you enter into it at the moment, and you don't lose that, but you really accentuate that. And then the color movement. So it's a multi-dimensional experience. You know, it's not that one eye camera thing. It's the living nature there.
I think back on what Martin said, and I got to say, I love your work, Martin. Really love it. I don't know how he does these layers of different times of day. So you have to figure you're out there. You know, I typically try to go out and start at 11 and finish by 3 because that's sort of the most. But it catches you. So it is like layers on layers, and you have to make a choice every second when you're painting nature, every second. And sometimes you have to be just brave enough to leave them.
Move it.
You know what I mean, Martin?
Because I find each one of these, I can literally sort of feel it in my body. You know, when I look at it, I can feel those trees. I can look through the screen of them and feel the water moving. And then the grasses are different. So it's so many. It's a multiplicity of experiences all in one work.
Just to like clarify on some of these, it doesn't really show on this image, and then I really don't have much else to add to it, but I got interested in working with metallic leaf about 7 years ago. So this, for example, when I went outside, this was done from life, and it was almost a straight shot one. For some reason, it worked. So you go out there, and this is quite large too. This is 24 by 36. So it's a big piece, right? So you go out there, and this whole silver on the river is actually silver. So you're working kind of in reverse. So I'm laying down the silver leaf with the negative space that the light would leave on water. And so it's a funny process of working the negative space first, and then bringing it from back to front, and then looking at it again, and hopefully packing your car because you're freezing.
Yeah. Go to the next one, the reservoir. When you go to the gallery, you all go to the gallery, because this work knocks your socks off. It's very large. It's at the end, along with with John's deer. You know, I sort of feel them the same, see them the same. And it's a reservoir. How did you find that point of view? You seem high.
It was done completely in the studio. It's
okay.
46 by 46. I was there actually with Jen and her friend Chris and another friend. So we went for the big walk, and it was so spectacular that it just burned itself into my brain. And So this was all done in the studio, but once again, you have the silver and, I mean, after you spend whatever he says, with the 10,000 hours outside, you have your own vision of what things look like. And I guess that's all I've got for you.
That's what they call eidetic memory, that it sears so much into your mind. The areas that look slightly brown on the water here in this reproduction are actually silver and reflecting. And that's brings the drama, the panorama, the light, the atmosphere, the clouds. I find this really wonderful.
Thank you.
So a couple of things to say about Anne Leith, and that is she's an artist, but also a videographer, has worked with museums, galleries, curating, consulting, art criticism, sales, administration. Oh, you've done some restoration work. Wow. She is currently also taught and is an adjunct professor and teaches contemporary art history. I bow down to you because I did that for 30 years, and every year you have to add another year onto it.
Another year to your life, at least.
And studio and video all in the school. Is it the School of Education, or you're teaching education?
I taught in both departments, undergrad.
Oh yeah, okay.
Grad, and then I mostly, sorry, of course my computer's dying as we speak. I got to plug it back in. But yeah, so it was, I been working for 8.5 years at Rosemont College, and they,
right.
As an adjunct, they kind of put you through your paces. So everything from undergrad, grad, art history, we taught video.
Now, do you live
studio
around Woodstock nearby, or are you closer in Pennsylvania?
I've been in PA for a while, but I've relocated up to the Hudson Valley, so I'm really super excited. I've been coming up for 3 years, and it's a magical place for a painter.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's come to Ashley Garrett, and her works are much more abstract. So we want to enter into that. You especially want to look at this one, but you could show all four and then come back to this one. This is called, now, Ashley, you pronounce that for me.
It's called Gloaming.
Oh, that's Gloaming, but the one before that.
Oh, the other one before it is called Wiona.
Wiona, okay, I've got it right. So we'll come back to that one. And then there's Gloaming, and that's Gloaming, and then Release, and then Eidolon.
Yeah, Eidolon, and this one's called Darkling Plain, the one that was before. That one, yeah.
Okay. Oh, I had the wrong title down. All right, so let's go back to Wiona, just as a starting point. Yes, which is that number 16, and this seems very abstract. It seems nature, mind, body, all of this. How do you find yourself? How do you find yourself at all in relationship to nature and to yourself, personhood?
Yeah, so a lot of my process is based in memory and imagination, and contacting feelings and emotions and processing them in the painting. I also have access to the woods, I'm very lucky for that. We have woods right behind our house, so I get to go up and walk around there, and right around our studio and stuff. It's very woodsy, and we have a creek too. So I also grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania and had access to animals and stuff like that. And we had some animals that were breeding pairs, so we always had babies and stuff around. So I'm very familiar with life cycles and watching things change and letting go and all that stuff. This is a painting that's about remembering a place that I grew up knowing very intimately, and calling up the feelings of what it was like to really be there and experience it over time. I also resonate a lot with what Martin's doing, I guess, time-wise, because for me, the paintings really have like compressed time in them, because it's about experiencing space at the time, over time. And then in the studio, it's kind of recalling that while letting go of it at the same time, and letting the feelings come up out of it, and the attachments. And all of that comes through the resonance of the color and the mark making. And then there's also the abstract, the energy, the movement of the brush and all that stuff kind of meets the moment in the canvas.
It's interesting because they seem they're like figments of things that that we make something of, that we feel or touch. You know, there's some body references in this. It took me a while. You know, I looked at your work and I came back. I thought, oh yeah, I could. You know, it looks like there's some breaths or face or whatever. And yet my first take was waterfall, and I find that extraordinarily moving. And how did you happen to put the little fence portion in that upper left? Was that an impulse of sort of personal movement in this, or what?
Well, it's part of it's the space, you know, like this is my memory of this particular place. And this does have a fence. So it's like, how can I work with the truth of what was there and also the resonance of my memory of it? So I really wanted to bring the fence in, which was like a huge risk after putting in this kind of nice color and stuff in the background. And just that experience of really letting go in the painting and letting it kind of push to the next level. And I was really excited to paint that fence because it was there and it was in my mind. So I really got into all the color detail stuff of kind of playing with all those pinks and the dark colors too. And it just felt like it all kind of flowed naturally once I let the painting out of itself.
What's the title mean? I looked it up, but I thought, oh, okay.
It's the name of the park that it's based on.
All right.
Mm-hmm. It's called We Own a Park because the town couldn't agree on a name to name it. There were a lot of local politics, so they wanted to call it We Own a Park. I always like the word by itself because it's kind of poetic looking. I know it's kind of like a little hidden, but I thought it was fun.
Oh, I like it. And I looked it up, and there's a slang term in the language in Chile. It means dude or person, and they use it all the time. Oh, this We Own a, you know, being my grandmother or something, she's doing this or that. So I just like that clamoring in there too. Let's go on to, there's Gloman. Would you say anything about this one?
Yeah, this one doesn't represent very well digitally. So it's very like it looks very kind of mashed together in this image, but it has a lot more contrast than you're seeing here. And like you can really see the depth of it and stuff like that. But it is kind of an overall like twilight, darkening light kind of feeling. And I have a couple of paintings that are like, I'm really curious about what is it like to pull color out of darkness. And that's kind of what I'm doing here. And it's also like, I loved what you said earlier about the air is water and flowing and that kind of stuff. So I totally feel that here in this painting.
And let's go to Eidolon number 19. Do we have that? The next one. There we go. So I also looked up what an Eidolon was, but I don't know if I got it right. So what would you say?
Eidolon is a phantom or like a specter or something like that.
Right,
I kind of read it like the spirit of a place, but I also mean it in the sense of the way Whitman talked about it. There's a long poem that he wrote about Eidolons that is like all of these ideas that come up in his mind are Eidolons, history, images, spaces, feelings, and he keeps at the end of each stanza he keeps saying this is an Eidolon. And I just really resonated with the idea that like placehood and the way that we feel it inside and the way we experience it also has such a spirit that we contact, and yet you know we have this inner worlds going on at the same time, so they meet each other. So that's kind of what I was going for. Yeah,
that's what I would have said. I think you know in the kind of density of movement that it is like nature, forest, and so on. And yet there is something in the center. It looks like almost that pink is, once I looked up the word, I thought, oh, that looks like a figure, maybe. You know, I like the fact things look like maybe, but not. And so it makes a more open participation, I would say, in it. Okay, we'll round out here. We're doing okay. Time wise, you mentioned some of the things that I was, that you know you brought up rural. You also interned at Jim Henson's workshop. That must have been interesting.
It was amazing.
Yeah, and the fact that you worked with the horses, with healing and in body work, that hands-on experience, it seems to me, and not with people, it seems to me in your work that that carries through. Okay, Iain Machell, right? Let's come to Iain. And thanks a lot, Ashley.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Iain, we can go through the 4 slides I have here. That it seems that there's a sequence. I put them in, although they don't match your number sequence, so maybe they weren't conceived that way. But that there's a kind of series going on in whatever order it might have been. So what is that right? And what, when you choose, this is tree, we got tree number 3, tree number 1, tree 11, 12, 13, 14. What is it that you're kind of exploring?
Well, I would ignore the numbering because that's more of a cataloging kind of thing. I'm just like, when I take the photographs, I start to number the pieces. But because they were all coming from this root, forgive the pun, the source of trees and my observation of trees. But I hop around. I don't think of these as being in a sequence.
Right.
Because I like to go from big to small, from 2D to 3D, from color to monochrome, from more realistic to slightly more abstract and challenging. But they all come from the same source. And I always feel I'm sort of very grateful to Jen for picking out these pieces. And when I first saw her choices, I thought, goodness, those aren't going to hang well together. But her eye, she picked out the pieces that kind of talk to each other, and they really do. I was quite encouraged to see them talking with each other, as well as, like you said, Sara Lee, talking to everyone else in the show. I'm sure when we close the doors at night, they're all chattering away. Be curious to know what they say to each other. But yeah, at this point, I'm pretty focused on trees. So that's the main source, and they're not done outdoors. At least I keep a sketchbook outdoors. So again, there's sort of the rules of, I liked what Anne said, the rules of outdoor work are, trying to stay comfortable and dry and do something. I usually try and draw something in less than half an hour. Otherwise I get really sore.
I was just going to say, what I thought was so interesting about your approach to trees, because you've been, even though I've known your work for so many years now, is that you kind of deconstruct everything about them. So you've got, and that's what I was looking at when I chose the pieces. I was looking at all the different ways you deconstruct treeness. So you've got like this sort of conceptualization here, which is you're playing with the paper, but you're also kind of looking at the idea of stages and layering and light. There's like a lot of very sophisticated things going on. And then in others, you're analyzing, the texture of trunks, and then others you're kind of wondering, like, what is the negative space quality? And that's and this is, to me, such a familiar thing for us who hike in the Catskills. And this is the rock formations you see, either looking down or looking up, or wherever you see these wonderful like abstraction of where things join together in the natural formations of the bluestone rock generally. And that's what made me was so attractive. But then you have them in 4 panels. So it's almost like you're kind of having like 4 different ways of looking at something.
Yeah.
Or it's almost like, but you break everything down, I think is what I'm trying to sum it all up is. It's like you kind of are looking at all the building blocks. And it's an interesting way to do it, to analyze nature like that.
Well, I think that sort of points out something that I'm trying to do with the pieces, which is to go beneath the surface and not necessarily focus on the landscape, the scene, the view in front of you. And I've done this, my whole life, and I'm lucky enough to have grown up in various sort of rural settings, and have parents that took us for walks. And my mother is a biologist, and I'm sure I've inherited some of that. She would just point to things and say, come and look at this. Look what happens when we pull this apart. Look what happens. Look what's underneath the soil here. So I think that kind of investigation has followed me, that I like to see what's going on beneath the surface. And I think as, even though forest bathing is kind of celebrating being outdoors as a healthy thing, it's very interesting to see the other side. And for instance, a huge mythology of the forest being a very dark and dangerous place. You find all of these myths throughout literature and history of the woods being somewhere kind of secret and a bit spooky. So something that I'd like to try and tie in is the threat, as well as the glorious celebration of nature and all the forms, all the wonderful, you know, the light forms, the incredible kind of muscular structures of trees. That as well as that, there's a threat. You know, we do have a very serious conflict, dilemmas with climate change. And even though I'm not like these two pieces here, this appeals to me because in a lot of my previous work, I've tried to put in something that doesn't belong, something that's maybe acting as an interference or an interruption, that it's not quite as obvious. There's a kind of aesthetic beauty to the texture and the marks on the paper. But why are they in boxes like this? It's like a mysterious form of measurement, or structuring, as if this is the human influence. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I'm not going to go be that specific. So that does kind of infiltrate into my work, is not just looking beneath the surface of the natural world to see incredible things, visual stimulating things, but also to kind of, you know, if the trees could speak, they would probably be saying ouch right now. You know, it's a troubled world. And it's also the 60th anniversary of Silent Spring, Rachel Carson's book.
Mm-hmm.
And I read it just recently, and boy, that is not a book to read during a pandemic. It is, you know, it's a very serious but well-written book, and to have that in the back of your mind as being, you know, there's something beyond something, the aesthetics and the beauty of nature and, you know, the wonders of forest bathing. There's also something else going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to have that infiltrate the work and still maintain the kind of the aesthetics of sort of technical skill and composition, because it's, you know, it's a gorgeous world out there. I love working from nature, and hope to continue doing so.
Mm-hmm. And I was fascinated by these two works, just in terms, actually in the gallery and here, in reading them. And in fact, some of what you're saying relates to what my, you know, non-knowing response was, but it seems like the veins of the tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It really does. And it seems like not branches, but more inner veins and
Mm-hmm.
things that go to roots, or the kind
Yeah.
of fungi that are work. And yet the constraint is there. Like there's some microscopic thing going on. Let's go on to number 23 of Iain's. Yeah. Now explain how this one, and that left-hand slide isn't quite as sharp, but this one has such a physical presence, and how it came about. You know, it does seem bark-like, but I thought, what is that?
it is in fact canvas, and it's sort of a recycled piece. That was an outdoor piece, maybe Jen remembers it. A canvas piece there was an outdoor piece, and it was in situ for several years, to the point where the canvas just shredded completely. And I really wanted to do something with it. So a lot of the weird discoloration is nature eroding the fabric of this earlier piece. So in playing around with it, I just thought this is really bark-like. It's very reminiscent of bark, and I thought the history and the imprint of the earlier piece, of recycling it into a newer piece,
Cool.
to construct something that had kind of the physical. I wanted it to be that size to really kind of dominate and make you realize, you know, that the trees are massive, and also that this, even though this is just a section, I think we relate to trees because they're vertical. The verticality of a giant growing plant, I think we identify it with it as if it were human or figurative. So I tried to get that kind of monolithic tree presence into the piece. At the same time, it's kind of, it's got that nice boundary between, you know, ooh, this is gorgeous, and ew, this is kind of strange and creepy. And so that again is something I would like to trying to weave into my work, is something that, you know, there's something wrong. This is I'll draw you in with the aesthetics, but, you know, there's something kind of slightly wrong with this,
And that,
without being political or, you know, preaching.
it's interesting because bark itself, and I go on my walks, you know, and the barks are both barks of protection, but also there are disturbances to it. And if you look at the trees that have been affected by the ash borer, you know, you have bark that's really disturbed or has deceased in some ways, and some of the underlying deceased wood showing. So that comes through in this experience, and yet, as you say, it's quite beautiful, and that conjunction is fascinating. I would just say, to round out with Iain at this point, that he is an emeritus professor from SUNY Ulster, and has received an Excellence in Teaching Award 2012, been a visiting lecturer many places, including Parsons and University of Wisconsin-Madison, wow, Ball State. He also had a residence. Did someone else have one? Did Anne have one at the Platte Clove Preserve? No. Just in one sentence, tell us about that. Platte Clove is like near here. And what does that mean that you're there?
It's a sort of an independent nature reserve in the middle of the Catskill Park. And there's a cabin right at the top of the waterfall that they allow during the summer artists and writers to stay in.
So you go stay in the cabin.
Yeah, it's only for a week, but it's a week of nothing. There's no telephone, there's no running water. It's Spartan, but it really I learned a lot from that. It forced me to just, you know, shut my head off and respond.
Yep.
I can highly recommend it. Platte Clove.
Yeah, I thought it was just like a cabin in the woods. So
It is a cabin in the woods, yes.
So let's come to Christy. And in fact, what you're talking about is a great entrance point into her work. I would first ask with Christy, in fact, I love this red fire ant coming after the bark. You know, it just seems like, wow, you know, we've got this creature coming. What is it that compelled you to explore this changing relationship of the human with the natural world? You know, how have you gone about it? Are we unmuted?
In general, not specific to this series, animal behavior led me to a study of habitat, which then brought me to discard studies, which is kind of the waste stream, and how
Yeah, that's the term.
our habitat is actually constructed by our waste or our denial of waste. But this series was responding to this idea of biopiracy from the rainforest. And we all know that the forest has healing properties, and traditional medicine is derived from the plants and animals that live in it. And indigenous people have been using this stuff forever to protect. I mean, the forest is a dangerous place. You know, there's predators, there's infection, there's disease, bugs, poisonous plants. So rainforest species have become an excellent reservoir of medicines and chemical templates, which researchers have been studying for a long, long time as a way to make new drugs. And actually, about 25% of all drugs today are derived, Western drugs, came from rainforest plants.
Wow.
But along with their healing properties, there's also an unlimited opportunity to make money from healing properties. And rainforests have been exploited and colonized ever since they discovered it. They discovered the Amazon. So typically what's happened historically with Western scientists in the last 150 years, perhaps, samples are collected in the field and taken back to the lab, you know, the country of origin, analyzed and synthesized and patented so nobody else can use them. So often indigenous peoples lose access to their own traditional remedies because Western drug companies claim them as intellectual property. It's not that you couldn't go out and grab a couple of leaves from, you know, your forest where you live, but if you ever wanted to market them yourselves as traditional medicine, they would sue you just like they sue farmers for, you know, genetic pollution from genetically engineered seed. So I just made a series of these representations. There was a fire ant, a blowfish, a frog, a snake, a plant, which I don't see on the wall, Jen, and some funguses. So there were like 6 of those different life forms. And also, if you look on their shapes, like this is a frog.
Yeah, leave the frog up a minute here. Yeah.
That's the chemical structure of what they grab from, in this case, it's a painkiller, epibaltine. I don't profess to know all the chemistry. I learn a lot from the internet. But I just thought it's interesting that the chemistry actually, there's this synergy of the structure of the chemical and the structure of the animal. And this use of animals, besides of traditional rainforest stuff in this way, patenting it, is a violation of the rights of nature, because the forest has a right to exist for its own self. It's not to be monetized for profit by a few people that got there first and registered it in the DC Patent Office.
The things that I find really compelling and connecting about these creatures that are on the wall, because we worked with it before with the exhibit I did, The Animals Look Back at Us Too, is they have, I haven't found the words for this, but they have a very strong kind of kind presence. Endearing's too weak a word, but you want to be with them. The snake, you want to be with this fish. I mean, this with a blowfish, but you want to be with the frog, and they're sizable. You know, they're a foot or so. I didn't check, we don't have measurements on this, but you saw them on the wall. And so there is, just like in Ian's work and in Martin's work, that there is this sense of beauty, of a kind of caring beauty. And I find that interesting, that this is not just a hardcore, sock in the face, but it's rather, oh my gosh, look at this creature. And wouldn't I like to live with this, in my home? And then to see the kind of irony and the contradictions that are going into it. Anyway,
Well, it's possible that you do. If you look in your medicine cabinet.
Well, yes, with the medicine, we probably do. I don't want to talk about medicine at this point, but we all have too much of it. I've been doing natural medicine, I like folk medicine made out of herbs and ground up, and they're pretty powerful, and I hope sensibly found and used. Let's go to fungible, that last one with Christy, and then we'll come to John. Okay, this one you call fungible. Okay, what is this showing us? Why is
Well, it's a representation of deforestation as the frog's habitat, its pond, gets turned into a swimming pool with a pool house. And you see infrastructure going in below it, like it's laying its eggs all in the infrastructure and the money. And then there's a little traditional snake image, like sharing the experience with the frog. And fungible, refers to whether a thing is replaceable with money. And the idea that, so many of the things, this is more about suburbia, this is more about development, but real estate, but so many things haven't been discovered yet. So they really are not replaceable in any way.
Mm-hmm. I have
even a chemical, because we don't really know what they are.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's run down there because of our time, but this gives us a location, and Christy, it can always be a long, extraordinarily depth experience in conversation.
Oh, if I could just step in for a minute, we're going to be doing a talk with Christy and about her 40 years of career and everything, and it coincides with a book she's just published called Noisy Autumn, which is a response to Silent Spring. And that's going to be February, I think it's 5th. But
I checked.
Great. All right.
Saturday, February 5th. I don't have the time down because I wanted to mention that. So you'll have it in the gallery or virtually, or it's not clear yet.
One of those.
Decided.
With
COVID is
definitely one of those.
I know you had a book signing in New York, and I thought, well, I'll wait and see it. See the book here. Okay, coming to John. John Lyon Paul. So work us through these next slides. There we go. This is Miracle on the Mountain. And then we have this vivid sculpture that's a focal point in the exhibition called Fawn Constellation. And then Living Void. And so we'll talk a little bit about that one, and Below Sound. So let's
Below Sound is actually not the title of that piece. It's a different piece that's in the show. Yeah, this is called Turning to Light.
Okay, we got the wrong. Turning to Light. Cool. Okay. Let's look at Living Void for a minute, or for the number 30. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Your work is much more abstract. What does that open up for you?
Well, this is painted on the back of glass, back of plate glass. It's kind of an opposite way of painting from the traditional painting toward yourself on canvas or paper or whatever, so that I'm behind this glass. I usually paint with them flat down on the table, And the first marks I make, perhaps I then put a blue wash of paint over them. And all I can then see is the blue wash, but what the viewer will see are the first marks with the blue behind it. So it's reverse painting. This piece is suffused with light and is really inspired by color and light. I've always lived near the woods. My current studio, I've lived on the top of a hill in Ithaca, New York, at the end of a dead end road, and I built my studio in the back of the property next to a few hundred acres of woods. So I'm greatly influenced by the forest. But here the subject is really light and evanescence.
Now, you and I talked a little bit about, because I said there's something, when you call this, you know, a living void, there's something akin to some Buddhist notions. So I asked you about what forms of meditation you might have had, and you mentioned some very interesting things from being a young person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I never took a class in art, and I started making art in my mid-20s as a wood sculptor. And on the very day that I started that, I also started meditating. So the two making artworks and meditation started and have influenced my whole career as an artist. So that one of the things I have often done in the forest is meditate, or to try and I often have moved through the woods at the pace of things, not dominating by hiking through, but maybe moving the same speed as a stream, or pausing the way I'll see animals pause. I'm not sure that addresses what you're asking, Sarah.
Yes, it does, because there's a handful of forms of meditation, and they do different things. Ones that have come from South Asia and the Far East. So,
well, one thing I can say about that, there's a form of meditation which is called the Path of the Serpent, and the Path of the Serpent is a meditation in which you let go of all your body and your immediate thoughts. And the reason it's called Path of the Serpent is the image is of a serpent moving along the ground, a snake moving along the ground, coming to a stone wall and working its way through the stone wall. And suddenly a new prospect appears, like an open field or sunlight. It's a completely different, it's like a doorway or window. And this painting, Living Void, is a window or a lens.
right, yes, you can. And it's done in the glass so that the pigments or presence is a form of light. What I found a kinship with is one that's come about through similar experience, but not necessarily knowledge, is of the Buddhist notion of emptiness or nothingness.
Yeah.
And emptiness is filled with light. It's sort of the potency of nature. Nothingness means no thingness. So this of living void, this is the kind of stuff, even the empirical world around us, as it's gestating and disappearing, and as a form of being as well as becoming. So this has been very interesting to see these works. Let's just end with the work, that Turning to the Light. Go down to number 31. There, yeah. And you see that we have that similar opening almost into the mystery of reality of this ground in which we, a kind of ground of being, to use Tillich's term. So, all right, we should leave a little time. I don't know, Jen, do we have some questions, or do you have a question?
I don't see any questions unless anybody wants to put some in the chat, but I think I just wanted to ask John Lyon Paul about the sculpture that is become
Oh,
something
good,
of our focal point for the show, is having this deer, and it's a very early piece of yours, I guess. It's from the
Yeah, it's from
70s,
1980, I think.
1980.
I was living near Ithaca. I've lived in the Ithaca area for a long time. And this is called Fawn Constellation. The thighs and upper parts of the legs are made from Ithaca gun stocks. They're walnut gun stocks from the Ithaca shotguns. And the lower part of the legs are from axe handles. At least two of them are ones that I broke in splitting wood. I've burned wood for many years. And the fawn spots are inlaid maple and represent stars in this case. And I've always lived in places that have white-tailed deer from childhood on. When I was 5, I with the probably assisting rather than assisted by the my kindergarten teacher, made a paper mache mask of a deer. I used to practice as a child, going in the woods and following deer trails, and to see how quietly I could move, if I could move silently. So to me, they're very beautiful animals. They are silent in the woods. They're extremely alert. You'll notice the moon on the deer's shoulder is actually where a hunter would aim his kill shot. I'm a vegetarian. I'm a vegan now, and I've found that I can be in the woods, especially when I'm in the woods every day. I can actually be. Animals aren't as afraid of me as they are if I'm not in the woods frequently. That for 11 years I lived in Burdett, New York, and I could go into the woods and actually walk into groups of deer, and they would stand there. So this is a kind of a sacred animal, but it's a very joyful piece for me. It's a constellation. I'm imagining it dancing in the sky, and deer lived here before any people inhabited this area. So it's a kind of a local piece too.
Well, it's a little dark-sided in that I think the constellations also look like, what's that? The shot, from shotguns, and that scatter shot, and then the gun stocks making in the legs. You start feeling the vulnerability of the deer. It's an interesting piece because it bridges two things, both tenderness and also sacrifice.
When a fawn is really, really first born, and for a few days, they have no scent. Predators can walk right by them without knowing they're there. And I, one time, saw a doe trying to draw me away from a certain area. So I knew there was a fawn. She would snort and try and get me to follow her. And so I knew there was a fawn around, and I looked all over the place. I didn't see it. And then I looked at my feet, and it was literally inches from my feet, curled up. So that I don't know, they're really, there's a lot to learn from these natural animals. I did want to say one thing about forest breathing. It's not different from the Navajo concept of beauty way, which is to bring one back to natural state of beauty in nature. And also, I wanted to tell you one thing about the show. All these artists are bathers, and when I go to museums, it's disturbing to see some visitors of museums looking at artworks through their telephones, through their cameras, and going to the Mona Lisa only long enough to snap a picture of your girlfriend next to the Mona Lisa. Because what I'm trying to point out is that all these artworks that we've been exploring, we can bathe in them. And so often people don't spend time. They spend, I don't know what the average viewer in a museum spends in front of a painting, but many times it's just seconds, and then they move on. Okay, we've seen Starry Night, click on the list. But we can bathe in these artworks.
Cool. Absolutely. Let's see if we have any more.
I would like to add to that just a little bit, because I mean, I was really loved everybody's work, and I thought it looked great. And I feel like, all of us approach it from different angles, but really once you're out there and you're spending that time, there's this moment where you just kind of go, right? I just want to say I appreciate that and all of your work. I get it when I look at it. So, thanks.
Absolutely.
I think this might be a very appropriate moment for me to chime in to thank our moderator, Sara Lynn Henry, and our artist panelists, Ashley Garrett and Leith, Iain Machell, Lyon Paul, Christy Rupp, and Martin Weinstein, as well as the exhibit's curator, Jen Dragon. I'd also like to thank the Byrdcliffe staff, particularly Ursula Morgan, the Byrdcliffe exhibition director, and Heather Olson, the operations and administration manager, as well as my fellow members of the forum committee. And thank you all for coming tonight. We hope we see you next time.
All right.
Which will be February 17th, also a Thursday. Thank you very much for being with us.